All right, so maybe not the. I'm going to take the out of this and just say 4, because there's every reason I'm going to think of the 5th by the time I finish with a 4. But you know, I spend a lot of time with people talking about their business plans, and usually they have some reasonable thesis of there's probably a market for this, and we can make it. You know, there's lots of markets for products that haven't been invented yet. I would say that the first flaw that often comes up is the lack of a competitive strategy. You know, congratulations, you've figured out a new way, you know, something new that people will pay money for. The bad news is you're not Google, right? And ultimately, they're going to be the ones who get to make the money off of that. You know, you can't you can't both have an idea that makes you can't both make millions of dollars off of an idea and keep it a secret, right? Either it's a crummy idea and you can keep it to yourself, you know, or it makes lots of money, and everyone else who's not making that money will eventually find out about it and want to make that money as well. And then there's a question of, well, okay, so if it's companies that have more money than I have, more people to throw at it than I have, and an existing customer base that I don't have, why would I think that I'm the one that gets to make the money off of that? And particularly in software, you know, the nice thing about software is it's a fairly easy way to enter. I mean, it takes a lot more money to be a car company, you know, ask Elon Musk, than it took him to be a software company. But you don't get the same kinds of protections. This most recent Tethys, we do have a patent, and we're working on building more of them. And it's nice to be able to say we have a patent and we have reasonable assurance that if we make a good product out of this, we get to be the one who makes the money off the product. But in previous companies, I didn't have that. You know, so in the case with DaVinci, we made an email product that we were selling that ultimately Microsoft bundled into their Office and gave away for free to anyone who was going to buy Excel or Word anyway. You know, we had a very difficult time competing with that at that point. You know, and we really hadn't thought about, you know, we were just going to go off and make it. So when I turned around to being, when I went around to Accipiter, which is the banner ad management software, one thing that I realized, or one thing that I guessed correctly, is Accipiter, we were never going to sell 1 million copies of this software. It was a big enterprise software product that we may lease it for $10,000 a month. But Microsoft can't afford to make a product they're not going to sell 1 million copies of. They're just not. I mean, that is the one thing that I got out of The Art of War is that you exploit your enemy's weakness. You exploit your enemy's strength, not their weakness. Right? Microsoft's strength is that they're freaking huge. Right? So if I want to have a competitive advantage over Microsoft, it has to be based on the knowledge that they're freaking huge. Right? They're freaking huge. They're not going to make $100,000 software products that they sell a few thousand copies of. They're going to make, you know, $100 products they sell 1 million copies of. So I did have competition, but it was all competition that was roughly the same size as me. Right? So I had to outperform them, but it wasn't like I had a slingshot going up against a tank. Right, so it was at least on fair grounds, and I was willing to go on that approach. But it is, you know, many times I think that people identify the right market, but there's no real compelling reason why they get to be the one to make it. Early on, and Microsoft doesn't even try to be first, especially back then. They were happy to let somebody else find a new software product that people would pay money for. I mean, you know, so Lotus 1-2-3 came out, and then they came out with Excel, right? And WordPerfect came out, and they came out with Word. And you know, there was a thing called Harvard Presentation, and they created PowerPoint. And it wasn't until it was a multi-million-dollar market that they even really sort of thought about entering it or made public they were interested in entering it. They don't have to. They got money and people, and they can wait until you find a market that's big enough for them to be interested in, and they go in. There is no single answer to how to solve that problem. I would say that most of the artistry of a good business plan, unless it's built around patents, comes down to how is it that you're going to do that? Where's your edge? Is there, in some ways, and so in the case of Exhibitor, I guess the other part of it was that it felt like a business that was too small for Microsoft to be interested in. But in actuality, behind me, I had a simple banner ad management system. There were, at the point that I sold my company, there were probably 1,000 venture-funded companies who were trying to make God's gift to advertising in one form or another. And they were all chasing the same 20 or 30 customers that if they could get, they would make a name for themselves. And so when it came time to sell, I chose a company that was making one of those, that they put $25 million into making one of these things, and they couldn't get any customer traction. And I was 7 of the 20 largest websites, their CEOs carried my phone number around in their wallet, because if our software stopped working, they stopped making money. I had a very high trust relationship with these guys. Right? If I merged with a company and their product became part of my product, then that company was already on the map. They got above signal to noise. So I did not sell the company on the basis of the sales volume I had. I sold the company on the basis of it was intolerable to think of my competitor having you instead of me. Right? So I created a bidding war at the right time. But it wasn't obvious. It was sort of it was kind of a second wave. It wasn't the first thing that you look at in terms of what are you in the business of. It was kind of a second thing, if you do this right, that you get to be. And that was largely by design in terms of what I was doing. But it was a way of approaching it where I wasn't drawing the biggest competitors out for my particular idea. I think it's also okay when you're starting an entrepreneur to downsize what it is that you're chasing to something that is not, that's not going to get you pounded as soon as you come right out. Right? And that's like even in the case of Juicy, even if they could create a cloud based on a virtual platform, I would much rather them competing with a couple other Silicon Valley companies trying to do this than have them compete with, big cloud computing companies, right? Who their existence would be inconvenient to. Once they get that problem solved and they got a little bit under their belt, then maybe they can go chase something a little bigger. But competitive strategy is, I can't tell you the number of business plans and ideas I've had where I've thrown out because I just couldn't figure out a way where I get to be the one who makes the money that I know is in that market. The number of them went on to make other people lots of money at different times, but I was sort of happy not to be in there. Another one is the complexity. There's too many moving parts for it to work. Let's get back to our friend Juice. I hate to pick on him, but one of the things about their plan is in order for their vision to be real, there were so many things that had to fall their way for that to work out. It's too many moving parts. Again, from a systems thinking standpoint, simpler is better, right? The more moving parts you have, the more points of failure you have within it. As an investor, if I'm valuing a deal, largely what it comes down to is what do I think, if you're absolutely right about what you tell me this is going to be, what do I think you sell for? And then what are all the big things that have to happen between now and then? So the things you don't know how to do that you have to figure out how to do. And what are the odds of you solving that? Right? If let's say you're worth, let's say that you're potentially worth $100 million if you get everything right, but there's 10 things that have to fall right that are even 50-50. What's 2 to the 10th? One of our software engineers here.
1,024.
1,024, right? So your 100 million divided by 1,000 is worth 100,000, isn't it? Did I get that right? 10,000.
Yeah, 100,000.
100 million is worth 100,000, and that's 10 50-50 shots. You'd be very fortunate if I gave you 50-50 shots on the things that you have to, on the things you don't know how to do yet. Right? Now, if you have 4 50-50 shots within your plan, then your valuation goes a lot. Right? 4 is 8, isn't that right? So 1/8 of 100 million is an awful lot more. That's sort of $12.5 million present valuation, right? So, every time every time one of these things changes, it becomes big. Now, the other thing that implies is that valuations are step functions, they're not continuous. Right? You may be moving continuously at time, but there's a certain point where there's an assumption you're making that's unproven that becomes proven. And at the minute that happens, your valuation changes because you're no longer discounting by that assumption. Right? So the right time to raise money is always right after that happens. The wrong time to raise money is always right before that happens. And so you want to raise enough money to definitely get past one of those, if not several of those, before you have to ask for money again. So you figure out your plan, and then you figure out how do you make it, in their case, what would be a much less complex way of approaching what it is that you're doing. Let's save the bandwidth cost on people who are delivering video. That's a much, much simpler thing. People can understand that. You can see that there's only a few assumptions that you're betting on within it. It's a much easier plan. Another one is market need. And this kind of comes back to sort of the better mousetrap fallacy. I'm doing this better than everybody else, and so they're just going to find their way to me. Build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your doorway, is I think the original phrase. It turns out, and Bill Weiss, does he come through here ever?
He hasn't come to talk to this group, no. We need to get him in here.
Bill is, he basically tells folks like the Discovery Channel and Dell and Motorola what to think about the future and what's going to happen 5 years from now. There's nothing I've ever talked to him about that he doesn't know more than I ever will know on that subject. And if he wasn't just such a nice guy, he would be roundly hated. But he has both of those things going for him. But Bill told me something that I've taken to be a law, which is that in technology, changing behavior is always expensive, and pretty much always more expensive than you expect it to be. If you come up with a better way of doing something, just changing a habit, getting somebody to do something differently than they've been doing now, takes a lot of energy to move them. It's like moving an atom from a different valence level or a proton or whatever. It just takes a ton of energy to move something. So if you kind of feel like, I made a product that's going to save somebody time, or there's an easier way to do something, if it's not an urgent itch, if it's not something the market's pretty much already screaming, why hasn't somebody done this yet? That's what makes the urgent itch such a wonderful phenomenon when it happens. And that's where one of the things that attracted me to Tethys is that. Am I getting in trouble? Okay,
No,
all right.
we're just.
No, I just want to make sure she was okay.
Yeah, one of the things that attracted me to Tethys was that you have an entire market of people who are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to load their water into trucks and drive it several states away to push it down a hole because they can't find a way to get the salt out of it. They realize it's stupid. They realize that environmentally they could be shut down. If people knew what the real problem with fracking was, it's all these darn trucks moving all this toxic water that if there's ever a spill, it kills everything. And it's just, they all, why hasn't somebody solved this water problem years ago? It is, and the reason I know it's an urgent itch is whenever I tell somebody I'm looking at doing this, the first thing they say is it ready now? That's the first thing. They don't want to know, well, can it do this as well? Or that's interesting, what do you think you're going to do with it? There's a lot of things people will say when you say ideas. If the first thing they want to know is it ready now, or how soon is it, or what stage is it in, you're probably moving in the right